Good evening to all of you. We are back again with another exciting session. I, Ajay Jha, on behalf of ACS India team, welcome you to today's ACS Science Talks session. Today, we are pleased to have Professor Nandita Madhavan with us. Professor Madhavan is currently Associate Professor at the Department of Chemistry, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. She obtained her PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. Thereafter, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the prestigious Georgia Institute of Technology, USA. Professor Madhavan's research is focused on development of cheaper methods for peptide synthesis and design of peptide-derived ion-selective transmembrane pores. Besides research, she is interested in understanding and exploring novel methods of teaching and learning. She was actively involved with the teaching learning centers at IIT Madras. One can find several basic organic chemistry popular lectures on YouTube delivered by Professor Madhavan, which are hugely popular among the students. Now, I would like to invite Professor Madhavan to deliver her talk. Over to Professor Madhavan, please.
Thanks a lot, Ajay, for this invitation, and also thanks to ACS for having these series. I think it's really nice to keep the scientific temper going in this current period, and I hope all the viewers are safe at their homes. So today I will talk about the research that we are doing in our group. So our group, the overarching theme is to use small peptides to mimic large proteins. So the theme is small is big. And overall, what we want to do is use small peptide building blocks, which can self-assemble to form interesting three-dimensional structures, which could be useful as materials and drugs. Now, why peptide building blocks is because peptides naturally have this wonderful repository of functional groups. So we needn't do a lot of tweaking to the peptide amino acid building blocks to get this rich functional groups into our materials or drugs. So there are three focus areas in our research group. Being a synthetic organic chemist by training, the first area is peptide synthesis, where we develop polymer supports for peptide synthesis. The second area is where we look at peptide self-assembly and see how we can tune the three-dimensional structures that we can get from small peptide templates. And what I'm going to talk about is the third research area, which is function. And by function specifically, we are trying to mimic the activity of what are called as natural ion transporters. So shown here in this figure is a very, very simple schematic of an ion transporter. In nature, you would find more complex looking structures doing the ion transport. But what you'd see here is I've represented what are called as ion channels by a tube-like structure. So these are pore-forming proteins which allow ions to go through the membrane. And the other structure shown here as a disc are ion carriers. And what they do is instead of forming a pore, they take ions from one side of the membrane and transport it like a ferry boat to the other side of the membrane. So these are very simple cartoonic representations of these ion transporters. Now, what excites us about these ion transporters are two things. So if you think about it, in our body, the channels are very, very, very selective. So we have a channel for potassium. It does not really like sodium to go through. And this excites us. So can we mimic this property of ion selectivity of these natural proteins using small peptides? The other interesting property that we want to mimic is that the opening and closing of these ion channels is very regulated. So it's almost like a gate where you can get an ion to come and go depending on the signal. So you can do regulated ion transport. And this could be useful in development of molecular switches. So shown here is the structure of the potassium channel for which the McKinnon's group, McKinnon got the Nobel Prize for this. And what is very interesting here is it has a selectivity filter where the carbonyl groups in the selectivity filter allow for this cation selectivity. Shown here is another potassium carrier, which is valinomycin. Here again, you have carbonyl groups inside the cyclic structure, allowing the macrocycle to be selective for potassium. So from a chemist perspective, so this is going slightly more advanced than the simple picture I showed earlier, but it's still not very complicated. Can I think of these complex proteins as either tubes or macrocycles which have functional groups which would enhance ion selectivity. So if I can engineer a small molecule which either is able to form tubes or form cyclic structures, and based on the functional groups, I can select for which ion goes through, that would be analogous to a natural ion channel or carrier. The other thing which I think about from a design perspective is, since these need to go into a lipid bilayer, I would need some hydrophobic groups on these scaffolds to help in membrane insertion. So this is how I would view it from a chemist perspective. Now, one might think, why do I want to make these? Why do I want to engineer these molecules? Now, natural ion channel proteins, they are very difficult to reconstitute in their active form outside the body. So in the body, they have a certain three-dimensional structure, and because of being in the membrane, it retains that structure. But once you get it out of the body, it might be difficult to get it back in that active form, and they're also not very stable. So if we use these synthetic transporters, they can be very valuable model systems for developing biophysical assays to study natural proteins. They can also be used based on the gating for molecular stitches. And the third area, which is now becoming very exciting, is people are looking at using small molecules as therapeutics. For example, in cystic fibrosis, if the chloride channel shuts down, can I use a small molecule which could allow chloride to flow through and then be used for therapy? Similarly, people are also exploring synthetic ion transporters for cancer therapy. Now, coming back to my chemist perspective, the first point, when I think of all these applications, I think having some functional groups within the spore cavity or macrocycle structure would be very good in getting this ion selectivity or gating. So since this talk was on molecular engineering, I thought I would give some perspective of design elements that are seen in natural ion transporters. I am specifically focusing on the peptide-based small molecule ion transporters. There are a large number of synthetic ion transporters which have also been developed from non-peptidic starting motifs, but we are focusing more on peptides because they are analogous to proteins. So shown here is one such motif where I call this as peptide as the pillar. So it does not do much in terms of ion transport, but what it does is it allows ions to go through by being a pillar. So it's a pillar to have these cycles which are crown ethers, and these cycles stack one on top of the other to form the tube. I see participants raising their hand. If you have any queries, please post it on the Q&A chat window, and I will get to it at the end of this session, because there is a 30 minutes exclusively for the Q&A session. So thank you. I'm unable to see the Q&A at this point. So when you have these crown ethers stacked one on top of the other, this forms a channel-like structure. And because the crown ethers have oxygen in them, they allow cations to flow through. The other point is, other type of design element is, peptide is now not a pillar, but on a pillar. So a peptide is supported on, here I have shown two examples where aromatic compounds or scaffolds have been used as the pillar. So the example on the left is where you have several aromatic units. They are held together by covalent bonds, and these oligophenylene units have peptide groups shown by the arrows here attached to them. So what happens is, these peptide arms on each side of this rod comes together by hydrogen bonding to form a barrel-like structure. So here you have them self-assembling. The other part of type of design element that you see is a monomolecular channel. So here you have a larger compound. So you have here the aromatic unit forming a ring-like structure, and the peptides are dangling off of it. And this is one entity. It's not self-assembling. It's one molecule which actually forms the pore. When you look at smaller scaffolds, which is what we are interested in, a majority of the time when you talk about channels, self-assembly is the driving force. When you talk about carriers, you can also have smaller molecules. As I said, they behave like ferry boats. And I'm giving you just two examples of very small peptides. One is where you have a single amino acid derived molecule which can self-assemble, shown here by hydrogen bonding, to form these rod-like structures. And because they have these aromatic units and alkyl chain here, they can further assemble to form an oligomer, which forms a tubular structure which allows ions to flow through. Another example, which is very inspiring for our work, is cyclic peptides containing alternating L and D amino acids. Now, because of the alternating L and D stereochemistry, these cyclic peptides almost form disc-like structures. So they're not very helical, but they're more disc-like structures, and they can self-assemble. So in this, each of these is actually a cyclic peptide, and you have the CO and NH groups perpendicular to the plane of the cyclic peptide. So what that does is it can engage in hydrogen bonding to form tubes. Now what happens is, because of the L and D stereochemistry, you have the functional groups decorating the outer surface of this nanotube. So you don't have the internal functionalization that I'm talking about. So some example of internally functionalized peptide transporters. One is the acyclic peptides in-house. So these are developed by the Talukdar and Dhavle groups in Pune. And here what you see is they have incorporated an unnatural sugar kind of unit within the acyclic peptide scaffold. So this allows it to give that functional group within the pore interior once it forms the pore. And the second one is where you have, I already discussed these. Here I have now expanded to show you what these arrows are. These are, as I said, amino acids which can form beta sheets, and the R groups here actually come inside the channel, so you get functionalization. Cyclic peptides, like before, if you put unnatural amino acids, like how Granja's group has done, they have used a furan derivative here to get functional group inside the pore. Also, Royski's group has used an L3D sequence instead of the alternating LD sequence to put R groups here to give you some functionality within the pore. So now I'll move on to our scaffolds, and there are two halves of my presentation. The first will talk about acyclic peptide scaffolds that we have developed, and the second on the cyclic peptide scaffolds. So when we began our journey, our inspiration was from the cyclic peptides. And many of you must be confused as to why I'm showing an acyclic peptide first when I'm talking about a cyclic peptide first, sorry, when I'm talking about our acyclic scaffolds. But our inspiration was from Gadiri's, the cyclic disc-like peptides, which can stack to form the tube. And what we wanted to see is, if we put unnatural amino acids here, can we get internal functionalization? So we'll have a mix of external as well as internal functionalization. So when we started with a very minimalistic model system, or what we thought was minimalistic, where we put these 3 amino benzoic groups as the unnatural amino acid. So here I have the 2 positions which I can use for functionalization, and the amino acids we used were alanine, because they are relatively cheaper and would provide the hydrophobicity that we need for it to go into the membrane. And we use an alternating LDL here. And at that point, we weren't sure if having 2 aromatic units would prevent the stacking to form the nanotubes. Now, what my first student, Bahiru, discovered is that the acyclic precursor to the cyclic peptide works actually better than the cyclic peptide. So this is nice synthetically, because it's not that easy to do the cyclization reaction, because you have to compete with oligomerization, because you have 2 ends of this peptide trying to come together to form this cyclic structure. So again, for the participants who are raising their hands, we have a Q&A session at the end. So you can type your questions in the Q&A. There's a Q&A link on your screen, and I will get to this after my presentation. So thank you. So what Bhairu observed is that the acyclic precursor is actually better than the cyclic precursor. So which is good for us synthetically, because we don't have to do the cyclization reaction. And now the trick here is, with the cyclic peptide, it's very nice to imagine how nicely these will stack together to form the tube. With the acyclic peptide, now to get an idea as to how these are actually in the membrane, it becomes more challenging. So where synthesis became easier, the characterization was a little more challenging for us. It's challenging even for the cyclic peptides, but this was difficult to visualize. And what we had done, I will not spend much time on this because this has already been published and very old work, but I thought I'll give you the context. So what we did is we looked at the X-ray structure of the tetrapeptide. We could not get an X-ray structure of the octapeptide because they tend to assemble and we don't get nice crystals. And what we saw is that the dihedral angles are very similar to a beta sheet, which is a more spread out structure as compared to a helix structure. We also did computational study on the acyclic peptide and found that it spans half the bilayer. And we also found that the ester deprotected peptide was more active. So these are the models that we propose, where we can have either a tetrameric pore, because if you look at the model from the top, it almost looks like a C shape. So you can have two of these come together to form the pore, or you can also have a dimeric pore. And the takeaway message which I want to give you for this talk is that the C terminus would be at the lipid-water interface. And thanks to this observation by Bhairut, this whole area of acyclic peptide scaffolds opened up in our group. And we were initially looking at octapeptide scaffolds, and EC50 is the activity or the concentration of the peptide required to give half of the maximum activity. So lower the EC50 value, better is it for applications. So we found the octapeptides to give decent EC50 values, but what we found is that although they were selective to cations, which we think is because of these carbonyl groups, similar to the first slide that I showed you, it could not differentiate between various alkali metal ions. So I could not get it to prefer sodium over potassium. So then what we wanted to see is, can we downsize this further? So can the scaffold be minimized further, and can cation selectivity be improved? And so here I'm going to talk about in this lecture what I call as our small universal scaffold. So if you see, there are just 3 alanine units, LDL, and at the C terminus, we believe if you put something called as a selectivity inducer, we might be able to get it to select for one particular ion. Why C terminus? Because based on our original model, we think that is closer to the lipid-water interface. And we have done a lot of studies with other systems, which I won't talk about, which also tell us that C terminus modification is what we need to go for. Now, for selectivity inducers, you can have a motif like these, where you have a triazole next to pyridine, where you can have a divalent cation bind. You can also have a ligand. So now we are going to an extreme where you know that this Pi-box ligand binds to specific cations based on the literature which is in synthesis. So it's a very rich literature out there where you already know that there are ligands which bind to a specific cation. Can we plug those ligands into our scaffold to get what I called as our plug and select scaffolds, where I can rationally say that once I put Pi-box, hey, I will get copper selectivity. So that's the goal that we had with these. So the first system that we worked on was this system, where the selectivity inducer is a pyridyl next to a triazole unit. And we have a long alkyl chain at the end terminus to enable membrane insertion, and the length of this alkyl chain is such that it spans half of the lipid bilayer. So to assay ion transport, we use vesicles as cell models. So we do these studies in vitro, and how this works is we make the vesicles, and inside the vesicles we have to use some sort of a probe for ion transport. Shown here is a probe called as HPTS. This is a pH sensitive probe. Now, in the absence of a channel or a carrier, you will not have ions go through. So you add a base pulse, and if the pH inside the vesicle increases, it shifts this equilibrium to the right, and the concentration of the deprotonated dye increases. So in this assay, if you see increase in the concentration of the deprotonated dye, you know that this compound is working as a transporter. So what we found is, for this system with the pyridyl triazole motif, it shows a selectivity. So in this assay, what we have done is we add the base pulse where we vary the cation, and we also vary the cation in the buffer solution outside the vesicle. So we do size exclusion chromatography before the experiment to get rid of all the dye molecules outside. And during the experiment, we add a different ion on the exterior of the vesicle. So what we found is that here you see the graphs shown, where, as I said, we are looking at the increase in the concentration of the deprotonated dye. And the highest increase was seen when you had calcium. So we saw that this peptide is selective for calcium. And just to make sure that this is the best scaffold that we have, or at least based on what we have studied so far, we also looked at other controls. So we have another scaffold with a long alkyl chain at the C terminus, and we have a scaffold where we have the selectivity inducer in the middle. And when we compare the activities of all these, so shown here is a different graph where whatever rate constants we get for these assays are now plotted here as bars. So the red bar corresponds to calcium, and what you see is the highest in all these cases, there is calcium selectivity, but the activity is highest for compound 1, which is our smallest scaffold. And this again, the EC50 value is much better than our earlier systems where we have a sub-micromolar EC50 value. So now to probe the mechanism of ion transport, what we do is we tweak these assays to get mechanistic information. So one thing we did is we did the assay without the base pulse or adding hydroxide externally, and we see no increase in or change in the rate. And possible ion transport pathways are shown here. So if we had hydroxide ions come in the membrane to maintain a charge balance, you will have X minus going out or M plus coming in. So if either of these pathways are taking place, you would need hydroxide ion for the assay. But if you have the metal or the cation coming in and an H plus going out, which would also lead to an increase in pH here, you would not see an effect of removing OH minus. But here we see a loss in activity. So we know that OH minus is important. The other thing is we add a potassium transporter, which I had shown in the first slide, which is valinomycin. And if this transports potassium outside the vesicles, and the mechanism operated is the one shown here, the rate of ion transport would increase. That doesn't happen. So we could rule out this mechanism. Now, between these two mechanisms, we studied chloride transport using another probe, which is another dye called lucigenin, whose fluorescence quenches when we add a chloride ion. And what we see here is there is no change in the activity as compared to blank. So we could also rule out this pathway. So based on these experiments, we know that the pathway operated is a symport where we think the hydroxide ions come in as counter ions to the copper. And we also do various other assays. So we studied zinc and copper transport using other probes or other dyes in the vesicles. Now, to determine whether it forms a channel or a carrier, we do a YouTube experiment, not the traditional, the YouTube that you see with the videos in it. What we have is a YouTube, literally, where on one side we have the source and the other side the receiver. And if the compound is in the organic phase, so you have an organic phase and two aqueous phases. So if the compound acts as a carrier, what it would do is it would take ions from the source and take it to the receiver. To form the channel, it would need a lipid bilayer, and it will not do this transport. So if you see any ions in the receiver end, you know that transport has occurred because initially there are no ions here. And what we see is we see an increase in the calcium concentration. So we figure out that the compound is a carrier. And shown here is a schematic of the ion transport mechanism. Now, if this is actually working as a selectivity inducer, can I now jack up the selectivity, as I said, by putting a ligand there? And the ligand that we chose is PIBOX. So here again, the HPTS assay, and I'm not showing you the graphs here because hopefully now you understand what it is. So what we see is the selectivity here is quite a bit enhanced. The activity is a little reduced, but the selectivity is very, very high. And when we look at the ion transport mechanism, just like before, we see that we observe ion transport even in the absence of hydroxide. So what that told us is both these pathways are not operative. This is also happening in the absence of hydroxide ion. So again, to prove it, we added valinomycin, and what we see is shown here in blue is the assay with valinomycin. There is an increase in activity. So what this mechanism is called as an antiport, and we think that's what is operative. And again, we do the YouTube experiment. In this case, it forms a channel, and there are methods for us to determine that it forms a bimolecular channel. We did studies with other probes and found that it does not transport calcium and zinc, and it only likes to transport copper. So shown here is in the acyclic scaffolds, if I were to summarize, that you can have a plug and select scaffold where you can think of inducing selectivity by putting a ligand there. And we showed this as a proof of concept where initially you have a selectivity inducer for divalent ions. Now, when you plug it for a ligand which is known to be very, very selective for a particular ion. So for the synthetic chemists here, you know that PIBOX has also affinity to calcium and other lanthanides, but based on the biologically relevant ions, copper is what is biologically relevant, and which is why we focused on copper and calcium. So this opens up now a possibility of designing acyclic scaffolds in a very rational way, where I can predict for the selectivity just by plugging in a ligand which is known in the literature to induce, to bind a particular ion. Now, another question a few of you might be having is, if the ligand binds to the ion so strongly, why does it transport it in the first place? And I should have mentioned this earlier, but when you think of a bilayer, inside the bilayer, the environment is more like an organic solvent where the binding would be very high. At the interface, the binding would be a bit lower because now it's competing with water. So the binding constant at the lipid-water interface would be lower than the binding constant inside. So for the organic chemists here, you can think of how meticulously you keep water out of a reaction so that it does not kill the catalyst. So you can think of an analogous situation here. So the second part, which would be a shorter part, is where I'm going to talk of macrocyclic scaffolds. And here again, you would be confused when I show you an acyclic peptide. This is a serendipitous observation again, where one of my students, Hare Krishna, observed that when he was doing a simple coupling reaction, instead of forming the dipeptide, he formed this macrocycle. And this is a very beautiful macrocycle because you have these NH bonds inside, which can bind to anions, and you also have these pyridyl groups which might bind to cations. So he optimized it to a 22% yield. And for the students here, both these examples illustrate how a keen observation is very important in research. You might not get what you want, but sometimes what you get might be better than what you or your guide had thought of initially. So this we modified by putting cholesterol groups. So this gives your hydrophobic domain to help membrane permeation, and this macrocycle allows anion binding. So this work has been published, so I will not talk more about this. You can look at this paper if you're interested in it. And I will focus today on a newer macrocycle. Here again, it has a very nice structure where you have pyridyl and two NH groups. These NH groups can bind to anions, and you also have this other two oxygens which might bind to cations. So we don't know whether it would bind only to anions, only to cations, or will it bind to both. So this you have our ion binding domain. And the synthesis here is also very easy. It's a one-pot synthesis. So you start with the dicarboxylic acid, and this is an unprotected serine derivative. And in the presence of a coupling reagent in 43% yield, you get the macrocycle, which is pretty good. And to make sure it has gone through the mechanism where you have the amine going in first, followed by the OH, we also did a stepwise reaction where we first protect the OH, allow the reaction to go, and then deprotect the OH and do the second reaction, and we get the same macrocycle. So we know this is the structure of the macrocycle. And you have the C2 symmetry or chirality in it, which is also very interesting. So another thing which I forgot to mention is synthesis is easy because I can put different R groups and decorate it. And if I start with a pyridyl group which also has decoration, it's very easy for me to get cyclic systems with decoration. So what we did is we kept it simple. We put long alkyl chains just to increase the hydrophobicity. So at 2 places or at 4 places. And the hydrophobicity increases with the alkyl chains. And the other thing is the length of the alkyl chain is chosen such that it spans half the lipid bilayer. And here again, to judge the selectivity, we do the HPTS assay. So when we do the HPTS assay, what we found was that you see no increase in concentration of the deprotonated dye. So cations were actually not being transported here. Then this got us intrigued. So we did the lucigenin assay for chloride transport. And what we found was that, as I said, lucigenin fluorescence quenches when it's in presence of a chloride ion. So what we see is in one of the macrocycles, we see quenching of the fluorescence, which is the macrocycle 2, which had 2 alkyl chains. So this is sort of like the Goldilocks story, where the macrocycle 2 seems to have the optimal hydrophobicity for membrane insertion, and it also has the optimal hydrophilicity for ion transport. So this is what we found, and macrocycle 2 was best. We also confirmed chloride transport using chloride selective electrodes. Now, what we wanted to see is to figure out the rate of anion transport. We did this assay, which has been developed by a group, by the Gale group. So how this assay works is, instead of using your alkali metal cations in your buffer solution, you use NMDG, which is, you can think of glucose in the open form, where instead of the aldehyde, you have a methylamine. So you have reduced it to a CH. So think of a reductive amination kind of reaction at the aldehyde. So it's an open chain compound, which is very large. So the cation cannot go through. And the only cation which can go through the system would be a proton. And for proton transfer, we add gramicidin, which is a natural proton transporter. So this molecule, if it transport ions, will essentially just work as a uniporter, or will transport only the anions to maintain the charge balance when the protons go out. And what we found is that our compounds were transporting chloride, and the rate for chloride transport is greater than nitrate transport. Then we did the HPTS assay to figure out the ion transport mechanism, where we see that when we have different anions in the inside and outside of the vesicle, that is the only time where we see ion transport. So ion transport rates, again, you can see in the bar graphs shown in blue. So what you see is case A, where you have Cl inside and NO3 outside, that shows the highest ion transport rates. You have lower rates when you do not have a gradient. And when you have nitrate inside and chloride outside, you get ion transport, but it's not as high as when you have chloride inside. So this told us that the mechanism happening is a chloride hydroxide antipode, because you remember the probe here that we have inside is looking for an increase in pH, and this could be in response to chloride going out, you would have hydroxide coming in. We also checked calcium zinc transport, sorry, this should be copper. This was not happening using the other dyes. And we also, as I said, confirmed chloride transport using the chloride selective electrode. We found that these compounds form channels in the membrane. And these are the models that we have proposed. So it can be either a monomolecular channel. We have again done some computational studies for this, where you have the alkyl chain at both ends because of the stereochemistry. But again, since it's flexible, one can also think of a supramolecular assembly. It's very difficult for us to distinguish between these two models at this time. And the reason for selectivity is a mix of hydrogen bonding. So when we did computational studies, you see that the NH groups could be involved in hydrogen bonding with the chloride. So that would tell you why it likes chloride over nitrate. And another type of interaction taking place here is anion pi interactions, because the aromatic rings here are electron deficient. So that could help in getting the ions through the membrane. So the future outlook for these macrocyclic systems is, can we put gating elements onto these? For example, if I put an azo group, a thiol group, can I use this for redox gating, light gating? And the pyridine group in itself can be used for pH gating, where it can get protonated or deprotonated. I mean, it can get protonated to increase the anion transport rates. So this is sort of a schematic to show you what I'm talking about. And I will stop here, and I would like to acknowledge, as I said, none of this can actually be possible without the efforts of PhD students and postdocs and masters and undergrad students in the group. And I'm very thankful that most of the research that I've shown you has been thanks to the keen observation of my students. Today, the research that I spoke about was mainly Parichita's research. She recently graduated, so she'll move from this area to the past students. And I would like to thank all the funding agencies for helping us carry out this work, and my collaborators. I didn't talk about this, but Professor Shobna has done some, looked at the copper transport in cells using the transporter I spoke about today, and my collaborators from IIT Madras, where I had started my career. And thank you all for patiently listening to my seminar. I'll be happy to take any questions. And thank you, ACS, again.